So we have one more talk. It's by JJ Asghar, the organizer for DevOps Days Texas, my friend. And JJ, what is your official title at IBM?
Developer advocate.
Developer advocate at IBM. And he will be our keynote tonight and our last talk.
Cool. So hi, everybody. My name is JJ Asghar. And you can find me on Twitter at JJ Asghar. And I really do have the email address of awesome@ibm.com. Yes, I can tell you the story later. It's not that exciting. But if you know anything about IBM, it's usually a pretty neat thing to say. So I always bring it up. So yeah, I've been in the industry for 15 plus years now, running different open source projects. And this talk is lessons learned from cultivating those open source projects and communities. I worked at Chef Software before IBM, so I know all about the configuration management wars all too well. I have opinions, but obviously now that I work at IBM, I spend a lot of time with Ansible for obvious reasons. So I lived and breathed the DevOps community since at least 2011, and as Michal said, I'm very well deep into the DevOps communities. I'm actually an organizer for 3 of them. DevOps Days Austin, Houston, and Texas, which is ridiculous when you say it out loud. But this talk isn't going to be a tools talk. Yes, I might talk about some of the different technologies out there that kind of help organize open source projects. But this is more about the people. So hopefully everyone raises their hand, but everybody knows what open source is, right? Keep it up. Everybody uses open source, yes? Okay, good. There's no liars. Good. We know there's a ton of tools out there that kind of help with this space, but the human part is something that is overlooked so often. It's about the squishy stuff, the situations you have to deal with as a leader and as someone who is part of open source to be able to be successful. And these are things I've learned and things I've seen that other leaders have done that are either successful or, in some cases, horribly, horribly wrong. And it's kind of, you kind of would just take it and run with it in your own way. So the very first thing out of the gate, whenever you start an open source project or become part of one, believe it or not, is scoping your project. I cannot stress how hard and how many projects I've seen fail that have either overscoped or underscoped the actual project they were creating. Who knows about OpenStack? Yeah? Good, okay. So I cut my teeth really, really deep, I guess is the right term, maybe, sure, let's go with that, in the OpenStack community. And something I saw fail there was something called the big tent. Now, if you know what the big tent is, you know the scars that I have from it. If you don't know what it is at a certain time, OpenStack was trying to bring in more projects. But there was so much overhead with how a new project was created inside the OpenStack world that they couldn't bring in new talent because all of a sudden there was this really small group of people that it was all OpenStack. And then eventually they were like, okay, well, you know what? We'll just open up the door and any project can come in and we'll call it the big tent. Well, then all of a sudden, you have fucktards like me over here who have figured out that, well, all I have to do is create a website, open up a Garrett that, oh, by the way, Garrett is very difficult to use, but as soon as you learn how to use it, it's quite powerful. Create a Garrett PR that opens up this thing, and I need a Docker file, and I can get a new OpenStack project. I still am an OpenStack PTL for a project I created in 6 hours. And the best part about it, there's some companies out there that pay bonuses if you create an OpenStack project. So I proved to them that the big tent was a dumb idea. The point I'm trying to make here is that because they scoped it so large, it was ripe for abuse. You take this to the next step where you start thinking about the OpenStack project, or sorry, open source projects, as I get tongue-tied here. Open source projects you're involved in, and think about the ones that you might be looking at. Now, one of the irony of one of the best projects I was ever involved with was something called Crux. So we all know the Linux kernel, right? We all know Red Hat and Ubuntu and Arch and things like that. By the way, has anyone mentioned they've run Arch yet? Isn't that the joke? Thank you, thank you. Well, there's something before Arch. There was something called Crux, which was crux.nu. It's still around. And the neat part about that project is that it actually scoped it really, really well. They decided to create their own from-scratch version of Linux with BSD-style ports trees. And that was it. That's all they did. They said, you know what, we want a really small x86 kernel where you build everything from source, and it's all done with BSD-style ports trees. Now, the irony is that project was scoped so well by the humans that put it together that I learned, hey, you can have something as big as an operating system, but because you know exactly what you are trying to do for your scope, you can be successful. Hopefully that makes sense. Yeah, I got some nods. So scoping your project is unbelievably powerful. And it turns out one of the maintainers over the years, his name was Jaeger on IRC. Yes, I'm old, I use IRC. I actually met him, I worked with him for years. And then one day he found out I was speaking at VMworld. And he walked up to me after the talk and he's like, hey, J Squared, because I was J Squared on Freenode at the time. Yes, I have a Freenode account, leave me alone. And he's like, hey, J Squared. I'm like, how do you know that? He's like, I'm Jaeger. To this day, we're still friends. It's an amazing thing. It's amazing how small the world truly is. Okay, so we're talking about scoping the project, right? Like, obviously, every time you build up something, you have to figure all that out. But there's two main buckets when you come to the open source world. And the first one is personally backed. You have some itch you need to scratch, right? You have decided to create that open source project that does that thing, that widget, whatever. And from what I've learned, that's the majority of projects out there, right? That's the whole point. Creating an open source project, you should be able to just get it off the ground and make it happen. But the largest challenge with it is that it's your baby, honestly, right? Like, it's your ecosystem, it's your thing. It's scratching your itch. And you have to be the leader of that project, right? Like, you're not gonna bring in a DevRel person like me to be like, hey, JJ, can you run my project for me? I'm not gonna do that. I mean, maybe I will, but that's beside the point. And it becomes a double-edged sword because you are the leader and you have the ability to help run it and it scratches your itch, but then all of a sudden you're responsible for it. And there's people out there, there's engineers out there that just wanted to write their little project to scratch their itch, put it up in open source on GitHub or GitLab or whatever, Glitch, or is it glitch.io? No, .com? Anyway, the ones with the fish? Anyway, .com, thank you. And they just wanted to share it with the world, right? But then all of a sudden, when it starts getting some traction, people start using it because it scratched that itch that existed. Now you have to actually maintain it. And I'll get deeper into that in a second. You become the end-all, be-all for that project. And it can be very, very stressful. People forget that, a lot of nerds don't really want to be on stage talking about projects. A lot of nerds just want to, typey, get the thing out the door, and then, go play fetch with their dog or go play baseball. It doesn't really matter. You get the point. Because on the opposite side, from that personally backed project out there, you have corporate backed, right? I mean, there's two major buckets. It's just like beer. You've got ales, and you've got lagers. You've got corporate backed, you've got personally backed. Corporate backed, obviously, is, the majority of people I'm probably talking to here have been involved in some project or another that some company has decided that they want to, open source or open core and work with. You have to understand, first of all, it's a major privilege that a company wants to support you in doing this, and I acknowledge that every single day. We leverage those things to be successful with the different corporations supporting our software to be able to go out and make those things better. But the challenge becomes, all of a sudden, you have to listen to the corporation. No longer can you choose that, we're not going to go down this path because X, Y, and Z. Oh no, some SVP is going to come in and say, actually, you know what? That sale is required to make that thing happen. All of a sudden, you find yourself supporting something you didn't want to do. I may have seen this in a couple companies before where sales drove engineering and not engineering driving sales. Not to mention also, corporations sometimes come by and shut down your project because, well, fuck it, they might as well. I'm still bitter about Google Reader. I know y'all are too. And then on the flip side, you also have random corporations that come in and just eat up projects. We all know there's this one company that starts with an O and ends with a curl that might come and buy your database or your VM software that you might truly love. Yep, you might truly love that VBox. No, wait, that's too obvious. And it might come and take it a different direction. But again, that's corporate backed. They came in, bought it, and ran with it the way they wanted to. We all know that we all live in this world, but it's good to acknowledge that, you know, these things happen. So the next thing you need to truly embrace is to learn to have empathy for your audience. Believe it or not, being the leader or the maintainer of an open source project, or an OOS project, however you want to say it, you're a performer and a seller. You're not just a nerd. You actually have to perform. You have to be on point every single day. You have to be constantly recruiting and working always for your brand in that project. That's just something I learned so deeply at Chef, which was, as I was JJ at Chef, right? And every time I got to be on stage, every time I got to talk to anyone in the community, I had to be on brand. And same thing today. I mean, how I'm wearing an IBM t-shirt, right? Like I'm on brand as being an IBMer. But you have to recognize this doesn't happen overnight. You can't just all of a sudden become that person. You grow into that person and that ability to talk to that audience. It takes months and years to build up a project. Sometimes it could take decades. I know some projects who are still like just constantly growing. That was Freudian, sorry about that. And then it creates that community. But the scary thing is when you get deeper into this world, you realize that all these people who are working with you are volunteers. And the wrong thing said at the wrong time can completely destroy any goodwill you've built up building that community. Like it happens it takes months and months and months, sometimes years and years and years to grow. And then something bad happens, I'm not gonna judge, and then you say the wrong thing or you send the wrong email, and then all of a sudden things just go bad. And it happens. I've seen some super successful engineers out there who said the wrong thing at the wrong time, and now all of a sudden they've been, kicked over to the side. And it's sad. It really is. It can take months and years. And overnight, people's priorities can change, and you can be left alone also. So it's not just the negative side. It could also be that you have this itch, you've been scratching it with this project. You've got a bunch of companies that come in, help you out, OpenStack, that all of a sudden are there, and then 6 months later, they're all gone, and you have this massive infrastructure you have to support. I might have been in that space. It's not all unicorns and rainbows. It's mainly because it isn't. And it's hard and unforgiving being that leader, and you have to be willing to understand where that audience is coming from. It's like, how many people have tried to set up a meetup? Like a meetup.com, all right? How many times did you go to that meetup and you were the only person in the room? Way too many times. Yes, thank you. Yeah, we all know that, right? And that's the exact same thing as an open source project. That first time, you might have 20 people show up. That second time, you'll have 10 people show up. That third time, you're at the restaurant or coffee house by yourself. Fifth time, you're still there by yourself, and you have some random homeboy coming by saying hi. And then all of a sudden, 30 people show up the fourth time, and you're like, or the 10th time, and you're like, you know what? I really don't like this anymore. But for whatever reason, you get the point. And that's the nutshell with an open source project right there. How many times have I sat in that room by myself? Anyway, so there's a great analogy that I came up with by accident once. There was this company that started with an H, ended with an E, P-E. Anyway, the point I'm trying to say is I was talking to this one gentleman from it because he came to me, JJ, he was like, JJ, you do a lot of open source stuff. We have this project. We want to open source it. We just want to throw this thing up on GitHub, start a wiki, and the nerds will come, right? And I'm like, whoa, 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 hold up, man. No, that's not how it works. And he's like, really? And I was staring out of my house at the time, and there was a park I could see. And at least in Texas, you can't just have a trash pickup, right? And I saw all these people picking up trash. And I recognized that, oh my God, this is open source software. Because in Texas, in order for you to set up a trash pickup, you need to have water distributed because, believe it or not, it's a little bit hot in Texas. You need trash pickup spaces. You need to be able to collect all the trash in one location to transport it out. You have to give people trash bags. You've got to do a lot of logistical work. And when I recognized this, speaking to this gentleman about it, I recognized that he was really, really adamant about getting acknowledgement from his executives that he was going to open source this project and be super successful in getting all the nerds to come write free software for him. And I was like, no, no, no. It's like this trash pickup where nobody cares about the logistics that you have to do to get this thing going through your BISO or your Center for Excellence or all that stuff. They're there to go pick up trash for you. They're there to be part of your project. And it became really, really a really great analogy. And I have a link to the blog post I wrote about it as in a little bit better way. But hopefully you can kind of see the space there, the intersection of that Venn diagram, because it's all volunteer work. 9 out of 10 times, open source work is volunteers. I mean, apart from the privileged ones like me who get to work on it through a company, but most out there are all volunteers. And what is a trash pickup? But a bunch of volunteers. So let's talk about a couple things that, as a leader, you need to think about. And the next one is celebrations. You absolutely, as a leader of an open source project, need to celebrate. You need to yell from the mountaintops that version 1 has been released, or some user has been promoted to maintainer. You need to yell and appreciate those people coming into it. Just like them helping you pick up the trash at your park, you need to be like, hey, Jeremy here has picked up the most trash, or something like that, right? Good job, Jeremy. You get the point. You need to be able to celebrate. You need to find a way to say thank you to your teams that has been created. You need to be able to vocalize it in a way that they can take back to their however they feel success with your project. I know back to the OpenStack stuff is that they would celebrate that a new project was created and they were able to take it back to your companies and get bonuses. Or if you became something called a PTL, a project team lead, there were these other three-letter companies out there that would give you really nice bonuses every year because you were a PTL. Nothing's too small to celebrate. You need to take the time and be able to celebrate those wins. But on the flip side, you also need to talk about your defeats. As a leader, as someone in the open source world, you need to be able to acknowledge when things go wrong. When things break, when somebody put an rm/rf in your install script, you probably should acknowledge that you have a problem, right? You shouldn't hide that. You need to own up to these things because, again, this is an open source project. People can see what's going on. So you need to be able to say, yes, transparency is very, very important. If you ever want to be successful with your project, you have to be that transparent. You have to be able to have the ability to be trusted because that's who you are. You create a project that is now trusted. But see, at the same time, when projects go down to the defeats line, it becomes draining, right? Because all of a sudden you start focusing on the negative. And that's one reason why celebrations are so important, is because you need to look at the positive side. Because again, this is a project that's doing something on the line. One of the worst stories that I have, which I don't have the actual tweet up here because it's really depressing, But Adam Jacob, who was one of the founders of Chef, he tweeted out basically that all humans suck because all of you is just ask and ask and ask and never bring anything back. And it really hit home because that's what happens, is as a leader in an open source project, you just get asked constantly for things. You never get to see any reward coming back because that's all, people just assume you're giving them free work. Adam really did bundle everything up. He eventually went on sabbatical and came back in a much more better mentality, but I'll come into that a little bit later. Excuse me. So now that we've talked about all that, let's actually talk about some successful traits that I've seen consistently through open source projects. Now this one is so crazy, I hope you'll all take a gasp. Trust. I know, right? Oh my goodness. What JJ, you're crazy. No, but believe it or not, it's the hardest thing to do. You need to learn to trust your users, your people involved in your project. Because as an open source creator or maintainer, you have to trust that the people around there want to be there, right? Like, they're not there because they're forced. And you have to learn to trust that their opinions come in. Yes, there's always the benevolent dictator of the random like Postgres people out there and all that jazz. But when it comes to your project, frankly speaking, you're gonna have to trust your users. By releasing your code to the world, you trust that many hands make light work because now they see what you're trying to do, so they're gonna add to it. You all constantly still need to recruit those humans, but you'd be amazed on how many hands will show up for that. You'd be amazed on how many people also throw code out there that don't trust at all. And how many times have I talked to them saying, well, you know what? It turns out you can't make that meeting or whatever, or that open source meeting you're having. Maybe you should give that person the right to be able to merge because that PR, they can take care of that PR to do it or whatever. You get the point. And that brings in the next one, which is accessibility. This isn't accessibility like screen readers. This is more the concept of accessing your project. I understand that Slack is great, right? We all use Slack or Teams or whatever, anything like that. But the one thing the OpenStack project had that I still hold, believe it or not, as a pinnacle of accessibility is that they did all their meetings on IRC. Now stick with me for a second here. Slack is not open source, right? You can't run Slack in open source. You can't ever get the logs or anything like that. You have to pay to play. Teams, same thing. IRC is still open source. Now there are a lot of engineers in China, They can't get on Slack. They can't get on Google Meet. They can't get on anything like that. But they can get to IRC because it's all on HTTP. So all of a sudden, now we were able to engage with a whole group of non-Western thinkers in the OpenStack community because we were on IRC. And because it was also asynchronous and in text, they could easily copy and paste what was said, throw it through a translator, have it understood by them, put error stuff in the translator, and then paste it again into the IRC channel. It was, yeah, okay, meetings took 8 hours. Sure, I get it, all right? That's a little annoying. Fine. But do you have any idea how many people I was able to engage with that way? I had so many people that I wouldn't, as a Westerner, I would never have the ability to work with. And I still have friends there that every once in a while pop up on my IRC and say, hey, JJ, how you doing? And I'm like, you speaking a lot better English than I remember. But anyway, you get the point. Accessibility is so important for your open source projects. And also, having consistency. Because we all knew that 8 hours during that Monday morning, because I was a PTL, I could call the time, was that time that we need to come together as a team. Every week we had that meeting, and it's so important. So again, I get it, Slack's great, but we miss out on so much because of the paywall. And I'll start speeding up because I think we're coming to the end of time. So speaking of earlier about your project, you need to have a clear vision. You have to have a plan to move forward. as much as you think that project that you're working on is going to be the end-all, be-all thing you're going to do, you are going to get bored. It's frankly, you are going to hate that thing at some point. Also, they say that their engineers are kind of fall into 3 different groups: the pioneers, the town planners, and the city builders. You know, you've got the pioneer who wants to just have green field and be able to make whatever they want. They're going to town planners who want to like have a little, you know, general store, maybe some dirt roads or whatever. And then you got the city builders who want to build skyscrapers. You don't know who, I don't know you, but you probably fall into one of those groups. And if you have an open source project, you will, if you're a pioneer and now you're doing maintenance work and building a skyscraper in your project, you're not going to like it much longer. So if you have a clear vision, you'll be able to hand it off to someone else and maybe trust someone else to run with it. You see how it works? Yeah, I got a gasp. There we go. So again, clear vision is unbelievably important. And then one final question. Is it honestly worth the hassle to go into open source? I mean, frankly speaking, you haven't left the room, so at least you're interested in what I'm saying. And I hate to say it depends, right? But it does. This is a personal thing that you need to figure out yourself. You've heard some of the negative sides. You've heard some of the positive sides from this talk. And I can't make that choice for you. All I know is that for me, I'm never going to not be in open source. It's that simple, right? And I love working with the communities I engage with. I love being in places like this to be able to shake your hand and say, you know, how can I help you? That's my job, is to make your lives better. You just got to ask. I mean, because I can't read your brain yet. Yeah. Just saying. You get my point. So again, it depends. And so that's it. Thank you. Again, JJ Asghar on Twitter, awesome@ibm.com. Now, if you wouldn't mind, you don't have to, but take a picture of that QR code. It goes to a Google form just for me that has 5 questions on it. It's about my talking style. It only comes to me, not IBM, nothing else. It's just me to get a little bit better. It means the world to me that you would actually fill that out. Just put down your honest thoughts. I usually drink a nice little scotch after my talk and read them. And if I have some tears, I have some tears. If I laugh, kind of thing. So thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you, JJ.